Hi, I'm John Stevens.
This is Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.
This is Pod Have Mercy.
Welcome, Matt.
Thanks, John. Welcome to you.
It's a busy day today on the campus of church. We got the first time a lot of people are coming back. We're doing some antibody testing.
Yeah.
Hosting that for some groups and some of our staff doing that. But so it's actually going to be good to see people. I mean, even through a mask, socially distanced, but not on Zoom. I don't know that there's. I mean, I see you a lot, but some people I don't know on staff that I haven't seen for like 8 weeks.
It's crazy.
But
it's crazy. Yeah.
That'll be good. Well, today we're actually talking about a couple of different things. Let's call this the potpourri. You know, and they're both serious. One has to do with, you know, all this stuff is going on in the world and things are reopening and the whole coronavirus thing has become this culture war, and it really is impacting how churches reopen. And so I want us to spend some time just reflecting on what it is that churches have to think about that are different than other businesses. You know what I mean by that?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. And I think it's really, we're wrestling through that, both kind of the church and a culture. And I think the wisdom of the church that says, you know, we're not here for the bottom line. We're not, as you say, a spa or a salon. We're here to be the soul of a community. And how do we do that in soulful ways? Yeah,
and protecting the vulnerable among us. And the most vulnerable among us are the ones that are going to want to be back and find the most value in the community that we have together. So, you know, not only you and I are going to talk about it, but invited two of my very good friends that we have been in a group together for, it'll be soon 20 years.
Wow.
Jimmy Asbell, who is the senior pastor at Vineville United Methodist Church in Macon, Georgia, which is right in the middle of Georgia.
Okay.
And then Shane Green, who is the pastor of St. Paul United Methodist Church in Columbus, Georgia, which is on the Chattahoochee River on the western border of Georgia, but still in middle Georgia.
Okay.
And they're two pretty good sized towns of about 300,000 each. So like a Savannah. And I just thought, you know, with Georgia in the news and Texas in the news, I thought they'd be really good to talk about churches and what we're dealing with.
Great.
You and I have talked a little bit, and it's been in the news with Ahmaud Arbery in what was my former hometown in Brunswick, Georgia. St. Simon's Island, Sea Island. People may not know that's the same city. It's the same area. So this now national story of his death is really impactful for me because it's so directly impactful to so many people I know well and I love well. And so I want us to reflect on that a little bit because at least in the limited way that we are able to.
Right. I think it's really important to begin to and continue to put these things central and to wrestle with them as a community and as folks that desire to be involved in kind of these wider relationships in our city and our world. So I'm looking forward to talking more about this in the coming weeks and months too.
They may be totally not connected topics, but you know. Pod Have Mercy.
Pod Have Mercy.
We'll figure out how to make it work. I'd be interested. You guys are in Georgia, so you're in a very similar situation. You're talking about, you know, you guys and I have talked a lot about, just all the factors that go into reopening. And, you know, with the church, we think about the least and the most vulnerable among us too. And so that's part of it, consideration, not just whether you can open, but should you open. I'm just curious where you guys are. Jimmy Asbell, you're in Macon, Georgia at Vineville Methodist, and Shane, you're in Columbus, Georgia at St. Paul Methodist, which are two pretty good-sized cities in South Georgia and Middle Georgia. What are your thoughts? What are you considering? Where are you in this process? I know none of us are ready to say what we're going to do today, but what are your considerations?
Well, we're still watching numbers that are not declining. We haven't had 7 days with decreased cases or decreased deaths, much less 14. So we're struggling a little bit with the gating criteria. It gives us, we think, more time to work on the church. But I think you're absolutely right that just because we can doesn't mean we should. there are a lot of things that are legal, but they're not necessarily good for us. And so we're trying to hedge on the side of protecting people, in some cases from themselves, because some of my most vulnerable folks are the most eager to come because they're duty driven in a lot of ways. They're the you can't keep me down kind of folks, and they really are chomping at the bit to be here, even though they might be the very ones we need to protect from somebody else or even from themselves. So we're going slow.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, if you look at the numbers in Georgia, they're basically Muskogee County, which is the county that Columbus is in, and then Bibb County, which is Macon, Georgia. The numbers are almost the same. I mean, they're off by maybe just a few hospitalizations. We're in no hurry. I definitely don't want to be the first church to open. I don't want to be the last church. But our numbers have not. I mean, if they've plateaued, it's still a slight positive trend of a plateau. And so we have the same issue that Jimmy discussed and talked about with, if we have freedom to open, to kind of use that 1 Corinthians principle, don't want to use our freedom to hurt another person.
Yeah.
So we're meeting with our staff and our church leaders and just identifying all the different variables and problems and obstacles. And then once we feel like we've got a good handle on that, then we think that would probably be a prudent time to reopen, but we're not in a hurry to do it.
What do you think about church peer pressure? This is created
neighborhood church
it's
peer
the
pressure.
neighborhood church peer pressure, because we had a big church here right around the corner from us opened, and the lieutenant governor was at the service and made a comment. I think it was on the video. I'm not speaking out of turn. He said, I just want to applaud your courage to the senior pastor. A lot of pastors, don't have the courage to open. And I'm like, wow. I mean, it's like you're going to get shamed, Shame on you that you don't have enough faith in Jesus to open yet.
Well, I think that's real. I know in Columbus, at least with the other large Methodist churches, a number of the pastors are, trying to make some decisions, even though it's a local decision. We're trying to make it in concert with some of the other large church pastors in Columbus, and then to sort of broaden that out to just with the other churches in South Georgia, so that if there is some safety in numbers, we want to be relatively close together.
Yeah, we've talked about it here, and I had a pastor say to me, the other day that they agreed in holding out through all of June and maybe even into part of July. But if the churches around them opened sooner, it would get harder to resist that pressure the longer it went. And I think that's a reality that if you're in the minority, people begin to say, well, why can't we do it if they do it? Even though the variables of building, worship size, congregational makeup, all those things could be wildly different. But just the idea of they're open, we're not, creates that pressure, I think.
Christian Washington, who's pastor of our Upper Room community, texted me a little while ago. He was on a call with a pastor of a large church in California. They have 2,700 people a Sunday. They have already made a decision not to meet at least until there is a vaccine. So it's at least
I heard that
January.
There's another church in Columbus. There's another church in Columbus that, not Columbus, but in South Georgia, that have said the same thing, that they're not planning to meet until everybody can meet together.
Wow.
And, which is, I think, probably that might be on the other end of extreme to some degree. I think a lot of it just depends on when you reopen, how you reopen, what information your church members have. I think I hope, this is just my plan, once we lay out all the obstacles and variables that are a part of making a decision, I hope that sort of wins the day. and that people realize it's just not as easy as turning on a light switch and pretending like we're back in February.
Yeah. That's what Mark Boom has said to us too, that it's, I like that analogy. It is more like a dimmer switch, and it feels like, at least the way I see John leading us, is really at the pace of guidance, because there is a rush to want to get back. And then there's this the CDC rules are different, the White House rules are different, there's all these kind of competing kind of voices. And it feels like that, there's a spiritual core that's attempting to move at the pace of guidance that says, yes, we want to come back together, but also we're here for the common good. There's other values that are at stake. And I feel like that there's a lot of things that end up kind of getting in the mix of these voices that really don't have much to do with the common good, but more about, personal freedom and rights and who's going to get there first and all those kinds of things. It makes it really an ugly mess, at least on the Twitter sphere.
Exactly. It was funny. I was reading, I'm thinking a lot today about what guides our decisions. On the one hand, there's the science you were talking, Jimmy, about, we haven't had the 7 days or the 14 days, but even beyond that for us, there's got to be something way bigger and more comprehensive that guides us.
Yeah.
And it's making us think. I started reading again, Thomas Merton, No Man is an Island. And, he says, we are instinctively gifted at watching how other people experience themselves. We're imitators. We learn by living with others and by living like them. But that's good and bad. And the bad is that we're too prone to welcome everybody else's wrong solutions to the problems of life. We have this natural laziness that moves us to accept the easiest solutions. And I see that at work right now.
Yeah.
It's like, somebody just figure this out for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're having to think and work and make real hard, critical decisions. But I think I'd rather be lazy right now. I mean, will you just tell me what to do, please? Jimmy, just tell me what to do.
Then we can blame it on you, Jimmy.
Yeah, but you're
That's the problem, is that not only do we don't know, and we don't want to be the canary in the coal mine, because it's not just a risk of a bad Sunday or a bad program. I mean, this could be fatal. And so it ups the ante. And I know you have sweated over it, all of us, up at night and wondered and early and read. And, I read every document I could find, 177 pages from all the bishops that have issued statements, the Presbyterians, Episcopalians, trying to find that lazy solution. Or at least the best practices from a lot of different places. Yeah.
Well, it is good.
I don't have it, John.
Yeah. Well, how about you, Shane? Tell me what to do.
Well, it's a larger issue, not just on, when and how a church should reopen. I mean, if you just look at the issues that are part of church life, our society, human nature, there is this sense of, I want someone else to do it for me. That sort of absolves me of culpability. But I don't think that's the healthiest thing to do. I think at some point, I've been talking a fair amount to my congregation about the whole concept of Sabbath. And just that Sabbath is really, it's an act of courage too, to live to a different rhythm and a rhythm that is guided by obviously a relationship with God. And part of that would be caring for self, caring for other people, the whole do no harm, do good. So, I've tried to condition and at least paint the picture for our congregation that, when it's prudent, when it's right, when it's good, the church is still here now with what we're doing online. The church will be here tomorrow. But it's okay to learn a different rhythm for a period of time, because at some point, say in the future, when, hope and pray, vaccination, and we get back on the other side of this and our life operates at the same speed, that it normally operates at, then, we're going to long for this slower pace of life.
Yeah.
I mean, if we fast forward 2 years from now, there's going to be part of us going, oh, why didn't I take advantage of this?
Yes. Yeah. That's really true. I love that, that really Sabbath is an act of courage, right? And so that really is about trust as an act of courage, this trust of this God that says that there's an alternative reality that, that you need to wrestle with and live into. And I see us as a church, writ large, as a global church wrestling with that, saying, how do we trust, take the concerns of our congregations into the mix as well, and then how do we begin to discern what is the right path forward? I really think this is an exercise almost in contextual theology. You know what I mean? It's in the context. I mean, how do we work this out where we are? Because I don't think, like y'all are saying, I don't think there's going to be any one size fits all answer. And so we do as John has kind of said, we were working out our faith with fear and trembling here.
Are y'all seeing more people intersecting on a weekly basis with the online?
We are. Our numbers are up significantly, and engagement through that, whether that's asking for responses to things, prayer, emailing prayer requests. So not just passive views, but engagement, as we've tried to tease that out of folks, is up significantly. It's fallen off a little bit the last 2 weeks. Our numbers have been a little bit down, but it's the post-Easter slump, I guess.
Yeah, it's the same here at St. Paul. When I do interact with people, during the week, people, they're watching every week. They're engaging in some Bible studies that we're doing online. And these would be the people that, would be maybe once a monthers or things like that. But there's something to the convenience factor of, they can worship like similar to what Vineville and Chapelwood, what they both do with film a service, and they rebroadcast it multiple times throughout the Sunday. I've seen a fair amount of engagement.
One of the things that is in a consideration for us we're talking about is like, okay, well, let's say we could get back quick, but you had to wear a mask, you had to sit 6 feet apart, you had to skip every other row, you can't sing. The service is going to be compressed to 40 minutes because we have to spend 45 minutes between services cleaning.
You can't hug each other.
And so you do all this and you're like, okay, we're actually now learning to do a service online better.
Yeah.
With it, that's actually engaging people, focusing on people who are out there online. And then all of a sudden, it's like, to me also, turning it on too quick, we go back to like a worship service, I hate to say it, it's just crappy. And so, and you still have 3/4 of your people watching online going, wow, it was actually getting pretty good. And now it stinks. And the people who are there are like, this wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. Yeah. So there's an argument for waiting until, why would you come back if you can't sing?
Right. And if you take singing out of the congregation, to me, there's sort of a ecclesial theology of worship kind of issue is that liturgy is supposed to be the work of the people.
The work of the people.
And if they can't sing, then we're modeling the very thing that we all dislike, and that is worship as a spectator sport.
That's right.
We don't want them to come and sit, but this new model that we might have to do for a number of months to be together might be ingraining the very practice that we don't want.
That's right.
And we don't want them to come and watch. We want them to engage.
I wonder also if this kind of constriction to go back the way it is kind of shortchanges some of the innovation that the church is being forced to wrestle with right now, right? And so I know at Chapelwood, I'm sure it is the same at y'all's churches too. And the Bible study I'm leading on Fridays, we've got folks from not just Houston, but really kind of all over now that would never have gotten to know each other from, California and Tennessee and other places around, right, that are now forming community. And it seems like, and they're forming community not just on Fridays, they're now in touch with each other, and these are the kind of things that would not have happened. And I'm just wondering if in this stage, if if we don't constrict back over the old right now, if we can hold that space open against our own anxieties, what innovative things the church might move forward in that we would never imagine if we didn't do it this way.
We started, and I think it gives every church an opportunity to rethink small groups. And, that could be small group Sunday school, small group off campus during the week. And we sort of unveiled this small group ministry, or sort of an additional to the groups that we already have. This was probably about 2018, 2019. And part of what we're thinking about when we do reopen is to really think about how we can, use that type of ministry as a means to meet that community. Because what you're talking about is people want community, yes. Whether it be, 70, 80, 20, and the sort of scratching that relational component of human nature. Matt, you mentioned something I thought was interesting about, you mentioned the idea of patience, and, and John talked about there's something inside of us that wants to reopen everything so it can feel normal again. Yeah. I've been sort of just writing and thinking about just the overwhelming, the sort of compare and contrast with fear and control. And so much I think of what we're battling is, we're out of control. We feel like everything's out of control, and life, something else is dictating our patterns, and, wondering what it would be like if we sort of leaned into this whole time of social distancing and realized that it doesn't necessarily have to control us. We can sort of control how we respond to all this. I haven't got it all worked out yet, but I think there's a component to all this.
So one other quote, Merton says, "Anxiety is a mark of spiritual insecurity."
Mm. Yeah. So you cleaned me up a little bit. Put some.
Well, no, you actually
theologian on it. So.
No, you walked right into Merton. So he said it's the fruit of.
Okay.
You set it up. You segued perfect. He said it's the fruit of unanswered questions, but the questions are only unanswered if they're unasked. And I think it's kind of like we're avoiding asking questions. We want to get back so we don't have to ask hard questions in life. So, I think there's so much that can be good here, but I'm kind of ready for some normalcy. I'm kind of ready to go back.
Well, I had my daughter's a senior. I have a senior in high school, and Jimmy just had one that graduated from college. And
Jimmy has a son just graduated from the University of Georgia.
Wow.
And you got, Shane, your seniors going to Belmont. Is that right?
I've got one at Kennesaw State now, where Jimmy's younger son attends. And then I've got one that'll be shipping off to Belmont in Nashville for their music program coming up in the fall, hopefully, if all things works out. But she informed me, let's see, today's Tuesday, Sunday night, that she had enough of the coronavirus.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. She was ready for normal life. And, was about ready to just say, I'm done with it.
Yeah.
So last word from you guys. What are something we haven't asked, something we haven't talked about, something that's on your mind, your heart, as you're thinking about moving in these directions? What's your wisdom as we go? See, I put you on the spot because it's a trick question because they don't have any wisdom. There's no wisdom coming from them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Hey, I'm sorry, y'all breaking up for a little bit.
Well, I think, you mentioned earlier that like wearing the mask has become in some places a political symbol, or it's been divisive. I talked to a pastor in Alabama this last week that wore a mask, was retired, was going to preach for a colleague, and in the truck stop where they stopped to get a cup of coffee before going into the place, she had on her mask, but somebody came over, elbow to elbow with her, and then reached out and touched the top of the cup. Just sort of a little mask bullying, if you would, and it was sort of that political kind of motivation. And so I think it's a chance for us to Think about, Colossians 3, to clothe yourself in love, which binds things together in perfect harmony.
That's good.
To think that even if we are of that ilk, and that's the way we think politically, that there's a higher calling that says we've got to act differently. And that's something I've been wrestling with, watching it unfold and hearing some of those stories.
That is a great word. Shane, can you top that?
Yeah, up it, Shane. Come on, bring it.
I had a few, but I was going to save that for just another time. But I think there's some truth to what Jimmy said. I mean, you don't have to treat people the way they're treating others, and that has nothing to do with the political stance or where you're on the spectrum. Sometimes loving people is to make a hard decision, even when they're acting as if they're unlovable. And I think the church should rise above all that, and regardless of where they sit on any spectrum, and use this as an opportunity to care for all that are in her midst. And I hope that's what we all do, more than anything else. Well, listen, y'all be safe, and thanks for the call, John.
Yeah, man. Love you guys, and I'll talk to you soon.
Blessings.
Keep Take Georgia sane.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get to it, but I was going to ask, because I know Georgia's in the hot seat right now for the shooting that happened back in February.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But I didn't know if they were.
So you do know that's the city I moved here from.
Where it happened?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah, so St. Simon's Island and Sea Island. Brunswick is the mainland city from the island.
Wow.
I've driven by that Satilla Shores neighborhood 1 million times.
What was your reaction whenever you first heard about that story?
Well, I didn't hear about it until I actually saw the video. And then seeing the video was devastating. I mean, but then it just, look, I love that area and I love Georgia, but there's still a profound sense of racism that exists. And it's not always even subconscious. I mean, it's just conscious. You go, like my daughter went to Glenn Academy High School. It's integrated high school, but then you also have Brunswick High School. And it's a very different place. So when you go to a basketball game at Brunswick High School, there's this literal sort of crossing of the tracks experience. And that's in a lot of South Georgia cities. When I was in Dublin, Georgia, I mean, literally, not figuratively, you go into downtown. So if you live on the north side of the railroad tracks downtown, that's where the city is. Once you cross over and go to the south side, it's a completely different neighborhood. And the African Baptist Church was on the south side of the railroad tracks, whereas the White Baptist Church and Presbyterian Church and Methodist Church are on the north side of the railroad tracks. Wow. And they're not even a mile from each other, a half a mile from each other. But so there's, there are things that we talk about. We try to say, yes, it's better than it used to be, but it is still real, it's still present. And so when I see this happening, there's a part of me, it breaks you open.
Yes.
Because you want to think that doesn't happen anymore, but it does, and it's not surprising in some ways.
No.
The thing that was different about this was not a police officer. It was a former officer of the court or something, the DA or something. But then you start looking at the systemic problems of a district attorney's office and, that refuses to really push the investigation because they had a relationship with this guy who'd been a police officer. And then, no charges are filed. And then even after that district attorney recuses themselves, the office, the other office doesn't really look into the conflict of interest between the district. So there's that. And so you find now that the GBI is asking the Department of Justice to intervene. And these are the things that they're looking at, not just why weren't these guys arrested?
Yes.
And people could say, well, there wasn't a video. Well, even beyond that, from the beginning, even without a video, there's a lot of issues of how it was not handled appropriately.
Yeah.
Right.
And that then speaks to, there's this favoritism. There's like, if, you know, and I think that's real in any situation. If you have a former police officer, there's this sort of these codes and these relationships, and you know, I'll take your word. All right. And my understanding, and I don't, again, this, I'm repeating this secondhand, but I know the lawyer to the Arbery family mentioned that what his mother was told was that he was shot in the act of robbery, shot by the homeowner while he was robbing it. When we know that's not the case,
yeah,
it never happened. So, and again, that's I'm repeating something that I don't know, but I'm just saying that's what he said, that she was told.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me, John, because I mean, I think it'd be interesting to how to as a body of Christ to engage with this, because it's so difficult and inflammatory, and there's so much I feel so much resistance, even in, you know, to look at those things in my own self and as a culture, because of the implications of that. I think what my African American, my black and brown friends have been talking to me about, even in COVID, the way that, you know, there is more deaths around black and brown bodies than there have been around white, you know, and that so disproportionate number of deaths exist within that community. And and so the rush to get back, you know, for some of our black and brown communities appears to be like, oh, it's our bodies. And so, you know, you're not as worried about those. So I just think, you know, your encouragement for us to move at the pace of guidance allows for us to move in a way that to put on kindness, to put on love, to really begin to reflect in a way that, what does this look like for us as a body?
I think you and I have talked about this, and I think we were moving in the direction originally when we started of how can we have conversations around, you know, a lot of these issues.
Yeah.
And then, of course, coronavirus came upon us, but I still think there's a place to talk about the inequities as it affects this. I think to have the conversations in appropriate way is to have people. It's one thing for us to talk about our experiences of it, but to have black and brown people sharing their experiences of it, and for us to be able to put ourselves in a position to listen.
This is where I think the spiritual disciplines of curiosity have to become forefront in the discussions of what it means to be the church in the 21st century, right? And so what got us to the 21st century will not sustain our spirituality into the 21st century. We really have to become much more curious about what people are carrying, how they got to that place, what they're freighted with in their own histories. I think I shared this with you a couple weeks ago as we were dropping off food from the food distribution center up in at Fairhaven, then up into Northern Spring Branch. I met with a group of these students and asked them how they're doing. And one of the kids, and I asked them how their school was going. And this junior in high school said, "Sir, it's been really hard for me to study because I'm so hungry." And this is 3 miles from where I live, you know. And I have sat with that and thought about that every day, wondering what it means to be a pastor, a Christian, a human being in Spring Branch, in Houston, in this time, knowing that there's high school students that don't have enough food and they can't study. Mm-hmm. That to me isn't necessarily a sociological problem. It's it seems to be a crisis of our spiritual imagination, and I just wonder. It's
just unfortunate to me that many of the people that I know that live in Brunswick and St. Simon, Sea Island, they are going through this now.
Yes.
And they're furious. I mean, they're running with Maud, you know. Everybody's running the 2.6 miles or the 2.3 miles, right. You know. And a good friend of mine that was, you know, on staff, David, and there've been a lot of people that have been speaking out. And I don't say this in any way against any of them, but it's like these issues were there before and they just kind of existed. now it's brought to the forefront. And so it's not a good exchange, his life for a greater awareness of the racial disparity that happens. It's just not a good trade-off. When I look at that video, there's no way. It doesn't matter. Look, it doesn't even matter if he was stealing fishing tackle out of a house. First off, he didn't have anything on him. Yes. He had nothing. The guy's running. He was running. Yeah. So it doesn't matter. But it didn't even matter if he was. Right. He wasn't armed. And you have two guys, that confront him. I mean, call the police. Yeah. But of course, even, that becomes problematic. No, it does. And that's why I think you have to have the voices of the people that are most affected. Yeah. You and I have talked about having those voices on this podcast, and we've just gotten,
got sucked under the corona.
Got sucked under the
wave.
Corona. But I think it would be good to have conversations not only about this situation, but about in this pandemic, how that affects and the disparities that we experience. And that's a different conversation to think in terms of, who's rip roaring to get back to work and get back out and do all these sorts of things. Right. Well, they're going to be people that are not as threatened by some of the stuff.
That's right.
Yeah. This conversation today, I was thinking about the stuff that we were talking about reopening, but then, it's also appropriate to talk about what's happening in Brunswick, Georgia. But, I've been loving plowing through Merton again. And I love this. He says, for the Christian, salvation is a very simple thing. But when we analyze how we live it out in the world, we find a tangle of paradoxes. Yeah. He says, we become ourselves by dying to ourselves. Yes. We gain only what we give up. Yeah. If we give up everything, we gain everything. We cannot find ourselves within ourselves, but only in others. Yet, before we can go out to others, we must first find ourselves. We must forget ourselves to become truly conscious of who we are. And the best way to love ourselves is to love others, yet we cannot love others unless we love ourselves. We cannot even begin to look for God unless we've found him, and we cannot find God unless he found us first. We cannot begin to seek him without a special gift of his grace, yet if we wait for his grace to move us before beginning to seek him, we probably will never begin. And Merton says, does this sound crazy?
Yes.
It is. He said, it's supernatural. And we have to reach out to embrace both extremes of the contradiction at the same time to answer the problem of salvation.
Yes.
All answers that are not supernaturally saturated in love are imperfect, for they only embrace one of the contradictory terms, and they can always be denied by the other.
That's fantastic.
Well, he's Merton. Of course he's fantastic, but I think that, I just think it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal. If you're Christian, you have to be guided by a different set of values.
Yes. Yeah. And supernatural is different than superhuman, right? Sometimes I think, supernatural, I can't do that. Supernatural just means to say that that the Spirit of the living God would like to open up a different path, right? And if as we've been talking about in the Gospel of John with blind eyes seeing, that this is new sight, to see a new path, to see new relationships. And that's the supernatural way. And I love what he says about it has to be saturated in love. That's something to tattoo on our bodies somewhere. How do I saturate these decisions that we're making?
Well, I think it's appropriate for both conversations. Not only when do you reopen a church, but also how do you have conversations about racial disparity and inequality? Is this, embracing both ends of the contradictory terms that exist in life. Yeah. And, we get so comfortable in our one end of the spectrum that we don't consider the other. And I love what he says, or he didn't say this, I said that, we're not a day spa. We're not a hair salon. We're not a restaurant. So when people start looking at society opening up and they're getting so excited, that's not what we are. Yes. Right? What we are is a church, Merton says, we do not exist for ourselves alone.
That's right.
It is only when we are fully convinced of this fact that we begin to love ourselves properly and thus also love others.
Yeah.
We will go into reopening with the mentality of how do we best love others who will be here among us who are the most vulnerable.
Yeah, that's right. I love that, John, because we could gain the whole world in this, right? And we could lose our utter souls of what it means to be a walking around body of Christ in the world. And I think that's what I continually hear you helping us struggle with, is how do we maintain what it means to be the soul of a community? You know? What does it mean? What does that mean? So sure, we can reopen if we're taking our cues from a hair salon or a day spa. That, you say, is not our ecclesia. That's not what it means to be the body of Christ. So what does it mean to have and to invest in a soul of a community? You get me all worked up here.
I didn't mean to get you worked up. So what did you do? What did you do on Mother's Day?
Oh, dude, I almost called to see if you wanted to come help.
Come help what?
My wife had us like demo this entire like concrete structure on the side of our house. It was a bunch of pavers that had been there for 50 years, and so it had to be, I don't know, 500 pounds or more of just concrete that we ended up like demoing, then tearing out, and then taking to a dumpster. And so that's what I did, John.
Was that what Michelle wanted to do?
Michelle said, yeah. I said, what would you like to do? She'd like, well, I have this little project that I'd like to get all my boys to help with. I'm like, I hope
Michelle doesn't take this personally, but I'm really glad I'm married to Stephanie, because I said, what do you want to do? She goes, well, I just like to sleep late, maybe have brunch outside on the back porch, just kind of be with my family, hang out, do nothing. I'm like, yes.
I'm with you, honey. I'm coming to spend a Mother's Day at your house next year.
I do have a picture for you, Jeff, if I can send it to you. So this is, this was, I don't know how to connect with anything. This is oh yeah, it did come through. So here's, so you know, this is,
what is this?
This is my brother's taking this picture. That's my mother. So this is the first time that she has had company over to her house. They're in the garage having Mother's Day lunch. They brought lunch, but she's sitting at a table way across the garage. Which that. I'm not laughing because I think that's great. I think that's wonderful that she's safe, but I found that fascinating. So this was my opportunity to, and of course then we FaceTimed them, because Stephanie and I thought it was staged. We thought they were pulling our leg. So we FaceTime, and sure enough, she's like, yeah, I'm sitting over here. So she even has, is that a bottle of Purell on her?
Oh yeah, she sure does.
She's got Purell.
And a handgun, just so if anybody gets close. I said, that's
I don't know about a handgun.
You know, we had somebody come over that's a dear friend that has some health issues, and has been in her apartment for 6 weeks doing her work and all that kind of stuff. She came over feeling really good, and Michelle hugged her, and it was the first time she'd had contact with any human being, physical contact, in 6 weeks. Wow. And she just stood in our driveway and just broke down crying, because it hit her that this is the first time anyone has touched me in 6 weeks, and just broke open. And so it was an odd thing that my driveway became this kind of holy place in that touch, you know. And I think whatever communion is, there was something broken open there. I think how many folks are hungry for that as well.
Well, I want to thank you and my friends for joining. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, John. It's good to see you.
Yeah, we'll do it again soon.
Yeah.
I'm John Stevens.
And I'm Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.